And for the sake of the recording, I'm going to welcome everyone again to the County Extension Committee Tools for Leaders training. Everyone should have the handout that was sent in the email printed, and we also shared the slides for the PowerPoint with you. Provided that we get a quality recording, we will share these materials with everyone who was not able to join us today and those that were, in case you want to review the materials again or share it with your counterparts on the Extension Committee. So again, if anyone is experiencing any technical issues, please contact Cheryl. Cheryl's available by phone at 651-480-7750.
I also want to say welcome to Ivy from Hubbard County. I see that Ivy's on and wanted to welcome.
Thank you. So we are at 42 participants. Welcome. We would love for everyone to introduce themselves. If you can do that through the chat function of the WebEx, that would be great. In the meantime, I wanted to introduce myself and the other panelists. My name is Tammy McCullough. I'm an Extension Regional Director, and I'm based in the Central Region, and I'm located in the Farmington Extension Office. And joining me today are Lisa and Marty, and I'll allow them to introduce themselves.
I'm Marty Harder, Regional Director for Northeast Region and located at Cloquet.
And I am Lisa Hines. I am a Leadership and Civic Engagement Educator. I am just down the hall from Tammy in Farmington, and I work around the state. I love that my job is a road trip, and I also work sort of on the east side of the north of the Twin Cities and south of the Twin Cities. So.
Thank you both. Your sound is great, Marty and Lisa. Okay, so as we shared in our communication about this event, this training really is designed to prepare you to fulfill your leadership role as the County Extension Committee Chair or Vice Chair even better. Many of us are very familiar with the University of Minnesota Extension mission. We make a difference on issues and challenges that people really care about. And we should be proud that we're bringing the research-based information from the highly credible University of Minnesota. All of this is to build a stronger Minnesota through research, education, and partnerships. So as participants today, you will learn strategies you can use to strengthen committee meetings that you lead. You will be reinforced in the value of your County Extension Committee leadership role. We will review roles and responsibilities of the County Extension Committees, and we'll also share best practices and resources County Extension Committees are using across the state. Our format for today will include chat pots, which we've already started to dabble in a little bit. Again, everything that you need to access will be pretty much on the right-hand side of your screen. The left-hand side of your screen will be the PowerPoint or the presentation slides. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see the chat pods where we would welcome your questions and comments. You can expand any section on the right-hand side of the screen by clicking on the right-facing arrow. We will also be using a few polls. Lisa will be using a few polls in her presentation. And our group is also going to be sharing a video, so we'll be using the multimedia viewer as well. At this point, I am going to turn the presentation over to Lisa Hines, our Extension Educator in the Center for Community Vitality in Leadership and Civic Engagement.
And we will get into more effective committees. I titled this segment, Leading Committees That Work Even Better, because my assumption is that at some level, you are working, if you're not already have excellent committees, that you're going to take them to a better level. As I said earlier, my mission and my work with leadership and civic engagement is really around helping people do things better together. And some of that's about how we think about our work ourselves, how our minds work, because that I think is our most powerful tool, how we think about the groups that we work with, what kind of mindset we approach things with. And so I'll encourage you as we go forward to think about how you can help your committees work even better than they already are. And as so in the time that we have, and I have about a half hour, maybe a little bit less of our time, and then Tammy and Marty have a few things they want to share with you as well. My goal is to share some practical and proven resources from our center, the University of Minnesota Extension Center for Community Vitality. And this is part of a larger resource that I'll mention when I wrap my time with you today, a booklet and a program we call Committees That Work, Common Traps, Creative Solutions. And my hunch is there may be some folks here on the call today who have experienced the Committees That Work program. I certainly know Beth Palestad, my colleague in Rochester. She's certainly experienced it and is in the process of teaching it as well. So that said, I'm going to take us to our first question. And Tammy, if you get ready, I'm going to have you open a poll here in just a moment. I find that I want to give you a little bit of a humor here. If you would respond to the question, how distracted do you plan to be this morning? Are you on the end of on the left side of the screen where the webinar makes a comforting background noise while you catch up on your email? We know that you're busy people, and we appreciate that you got a lot going on and that you've made the time for today. Are you on the other end? Do I have your rapt attention and you're one with this webinar, with this meeting? If you just use that poll pod, it's on the right-hand side of the screen, just like the chat pod. You'll see there's that arrow that you click on that, and it'll pop up a pod or five options, from 1, catching up on your email, to 5, you're one with the meeting, and anywhere in between. Again, we know that that busy folks taking time for things like this. Sometimes multitasking can be a challenge. So the extent to which you can give us good attention would be great, and we know that there may be a need to handle other things as well. Tammy, how are we doing on participants in our poll today?
Really good. I will close the poll and I will share the results here.
All right. I think part of my question is also about how intentional we are about giving our attention. How intentional we are about attention in this time when we have so much to pay attention to in the world. So I can't see the results, Tammy, but perhaps you could share a little bit with us.
Here we go. It was just closing. It takes a few seconds to close the poll. Okay. All right.
Ooh, we're in the 3.5 range. Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you. I appreciate that folks took an opportunity. I know some folks either didn't get a chance to answer, or maybe they're working with Cheryl on tech issues. I'm not monitoring the chat right now, so if there are things that come up in the chat pod, Tammy or Marty, I trust that you'll help move us forward there. Excellent. Well, thank you. And with that, then, I'm going to launch right into our conversation today. You'll notice I started our program with a question, and I'll mention that explicitly because that is a real tool right off the bat. Whenever I'm leading a meeting, I usually open with some kind of check-in question that invites people, whether it's an opener, which is more related to the content of the meeting, or an icebreaker where it's a little more playful. I might ask about what things people love about spring or something. The sooner you get people talking or connecting in a meeting in an active way, the more likely they are to be involved later on as well. And so I offer that, the use of a question, as a way to kind of say, hey, this isn't all about me. This is actually you as well, and we're in this together. So I'll share that as a front end. So I'm going to show you this first piece about 3 keys to effective committees. And you see on the screen there, engaged members, strong leadership, and good process. This is what we see in research about what it takes to have a really effective group. Sometimes we say, well, we need strong leaders. And that's true. It's just that it isn't just about that, because we're all in it. So we need people who are engaged in the meeting as well, like you're on your county extension committee. If it's just the leader pulling, you're not getting as far, and you're certainly not getting as much done. That's why we're having the committee. And then you see good process there as well, because it's not just being together that gets it done, it's also how we're together, and process is that key that helps us move things along. If you look at that photo in the background, you think about it, rowers don't row well together just because they're all in the boat and they all have paddle. They've got a leader directing them to pull at the same time, and then they're working together to make that happen. So keeping a meeting on track and having meaningful discussions, the give and the take of the group, that meaningful discussion, is about keeping those in balance that really matters. And that's what leading, membership, and process make happen. So I'm going to take us first then to leading. And you'll see on the screen here, if I move my slide forward, you'll see I have a spectrum of leadership potentials. And on the left side, we talk about autocratic leadership. And there are places where that's valuable. I think in the emergency room at the hospital where someone's saying, here's what we do. You know, let's go this, this, this. Where one person is in charge. And when it's not going well, it's one person taking charge and letting the other and having the other members feel like they don't have anything to contribute. So in the context of this conversation, committees that work better, I'll encourage you to think about autocratic as sort of the doing it all yourself, and that's not the goal. On the other end, you'll see the laissez-faire, hands-off, where nobody really knows who's leading, and even when the leader is elected or has a positional place, they're not a person who are really taking things on. And so people can get frustrated because they go, well, I don't know. Sometimes people will step in that case. But what we really look to foster as a leadership model is that shared leadership you see in the middle, where everyone involved, whether they're members or they're the positional leadership, there's an element of sharing the responsibility for helping the committee get things done. In shared members leadership, it's important to clarify the ways that participants or members can be involved. Sometimes we'll have subcommittees. Sometimes we'll ask people to take on a task between the meetings, and I'm willing to bet every one of you has either experienced that in your extension committee or that perhaps other committees you're involved in, where you can see the ways that you can contribute. Maybe it's bringing information to a meeting. And certainly as part of the extension committee, you're being asked for your advice. So looking for that way that you can share in leadership, so it's not just about the positional, but also the ways that you use your resources, your power, your presence to lead as well. And in effective committees, strong leadership means encouraging every member to take responsibility for achieving the whole group's goals as well. All right. So encouraging that shared leadership, here on your handout, you may find you want to fill in those blanks that I leave. I like to leave space for adding in things. And like the quote on your handout, leadership isn't about who's smarter or tougher, but all the qualities we have or can work on. So here's some ways that as a committee chair or vice chair, you can encourage that kind of shared leadership. So one thing is to structure the meetings so that everyone's engaged, doing a go-around and asking people to check in on something. Voting certainly is a way that we structure meetings, but there's more to it than that. So that's why I say doing a go-around, inviting people who haven't spoken yet. I use I haven't heard from you yet on this issue. Could you share a little bit? Let's say it's Tammy, for instance. Tammy, I haven't heard from you yet. It's not about putting people on the spot so much as it is asking people who are part of the group to participate actively in the group's work. Another is to summarize decisions made and the action to be taken and by who. That's a classic end of meeting kind of, let's make sure we all understand. I know I've been at meetings where we get to the end and I'm kind of whirling like, whoa, what all did we get done? So taking the time to summarize things, even as you go along, particular agenda items, if you can just summarize what's happening. And that's a skill you can build as well. Matching the skills and interests of members of the group to the work. So typically, I don't ask someone who's not a people person to lead a volunteer committee in the same way that someone who's really outgoing and who's willing to like call people up out of the blue and say, hey, could you help on this? Or if I'm asking somebody to do, let me think about plan an event, or on my, with extension committees I've worked with, hiring committees, I'm going to ask people to be they'll be part of the committee, but I might ask the leadership or a couple of people to help go through applications early on using their skills, if their background is in human resources, if they're really a detail-oriented person and they're going to look closely at things. I want to match those skills and the interests of the people who are on that extension committee to the kind of work or the particular aspects of the committee that need to get done. And that might mean, particular individuals at one point and different individuals at another point. And then last of all, I'll mention modeling active communication. Because as someone said in the chat pod at the beginning, a leader who listens well is a person who is really using the talents and skills and strengths of the people who are in that committee far better than someone who's just doing all the talking. To that end, I want to just speak to that a little bit about just what do we mean when we're talking active communication. And I'm going to tap Tammy and Marty in just a moment for a few thoughts from them. But here's the list that is also on your handout on the bottom of the first page. So paraphrasing content, sort of cut it, using that, repeating back what you hear, using active listening phrases that let people know that you're paying attention, avoiding the why. And I'll mention this because if you think about it, why is sometimes appropriate, but far less than we typically hear it in the world. The why is like, well, why that? And you can almost hear that sort of, I'm not trusting you, or I'm not sure about that. And it sort of challenges people instead of invites them. So I encourage people to hold off on that. And then the probe, the tell me more. Tell me more about what you're thinking. If I get a short answer, if I'm really curious, like tell me a little bit more about what you're thinking there. It helps open up the conversation so we're exploring together instead of the kind of yes-no that can lead to not very rich conversation. So all that being said, I prepped Tammy and Marty a little bit and asked them if they would share some things they've learned about leading committees effectively. Just 2 or 3 things from each of you would be great. So Tammy, would you start?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I think one of the qualities in organizing a meeting or having an effective meeting would be being organized. And so being well aware of what the agenda is and who you're going to be calling on to report on the different agenda items and having some general sense of what that topic is and what the discussion might be, if you can predict what that discussion might be and how much time it may take. So just being organized and prepared with the agenda.
Okay. All right. And Marty, do you have some things that you've noticed or practiced for leading committees?
In leading the meetings, it's important to have that communication lens on, as you had identified earlier, so that while running the meeting, you're observing who is participating fully in that, as well as if there are some concerns that need to be addressed at the onset or questions, answering those questions up front. That way it builds that relationship and helps with that engagement.
So Marty, I want to ask you a little bit more. When you talk about watching those communication behaviors, how might you approach someone, or say you're in an extension committee meeting, how might you invite someone to get more involved? What would be a way, how would you do that?
I think it is in a respectful manner to be able to ask the whole group if there are any other ideas that others have, as well as having preparation with the chair so that they may notice that specifically, and then the regional director and the chair and vice chair having that common philosophy of engaging everyone.
All right. Wow. I actually just heard a couple of really important things from you both. From Tammy, sort of the logistics side of being prepared, being organized, having materials ready, anticipating timing so that the flow of the meeting really works. If you've got an hour-and-a-half long meeting, that it's actually for an hour and a half and not 2 hours or 2.5. And then from Marty, a complimentary, like paying attention in the meeting to the kind of communication pieces that are going on and really inviting it, and that powerful piece about being on the same page, metaphorically, with your chair, so that idea of engaging all is really part of the mix that you bring to your extension committee meetings. Super, super. And you'll notice in the process of inviting them and them responding, I've just been using some of the probe with Marty. I've also been paraphrasing a bit their content and summarizing as well, so that you have a chance to hear it from them, but also hear it in a slightly different way from another perspective, which is mine. So a little bit there about modeling active communication, because I do find myself thinking with active communication, it's one thing to talk about it, it's another thing to do it. And so that's why I really appreciate that Tammy and Marty provided examples that I know are absolutely ripped from the meeting, as they say. I suppose we could say ripped from the headline, but those are real world kind of experiences. So let's head on to the thing that we usually think of as effective meetings, and some of you mentioned in your chat, around helpful meeting agendas. And I got a couple of tips there. You'll find that this is also on the second page of your effective meetings handout in a little more detail as well. So if you're thinking about, what does it mean to define results? I like to ask questions. And so you'll see there in the defined results, it's about what do we need to accomplish. So you're thinking about the end result. So in a sense, it's like what Tammy was speaking to in the being prepared and being organized. Thinking about what you need by the end of the meeting. I know as county fair time comes along, oftentimes county extension committee, that you're thinking about some of the things that might need to happen at your county fair, or if there are particular summertime activities that the extension committee either needs to know about or might be contributing to in some way, whether it's fair or camp or any number of activities, field days, you name it. And so there's a couple questions there about what do you need to accomplish? How long do you have if you know that you've got a tight meeting time? Making sure that you do the homework on the front end so you're not spinning wheels when you get into the meeting. Next, listing the agenda topics. Sometimes the results and the time frame sound like the topics, but actually I would encourage you to kind of tease those out a little bit and think about what kind of topics you need to cover, what information is needed, what decisions need to be made. I know in my own work team, you would think that people who do leadership and civic engagement training, that we would have it all figured out. And I would tell you that probably, oh boy, it's been a long time now, like over a decade. That's a long time now for me. That we learned that in our own staff meetings, we needed to really start clarifying what was up for discussion, what needed a decision, and what needed more information. So we started tapping our agendas to reflect that so that we were really practicing what we teach. We're at a different place in our teamwork now, so we don't do that quite as explicitly, but that was a really nice way to figure out, like, what were we working on where were we in the process of coming to a decision. Putting time limits around agenda items and then sticking to them. I will tell you that I worked with a group about 10 years ago. They were a brand new board. Many of the people had never served on a board, and their early meetings, now this wasn't an extension committee, their early meetings took 4 hours. Oh my goodness, it was painful. But they were new and they were learning a lot. Within 4 months, they had it down to 2.5 hours because they started looking at their agendas and saying, okay, how much time do we allot for this? And they were learning what kind of time do we need to discuss things, and as we learned techniques for working on decision making. So they were both learning and practicing. And so I use that time limits on there as one of those, paying attention to those things so that you're using time wisely. Matching content and the agenda to the order of importance. I never put complex things on first. I like to help people warm up to the meeting. But that complex stuff, if I save it till the last part of the meeting, can be really hard because it sort of sets people up. And you probably know that as well. I just like to include that. Controversial items would be in that mix as well, conflict, that sort of thing. Sort of midway through is good. Early on, late, early in the meeting, or midway. Suggesting a process. Here's where we get into things like, do we need a decision-making process? Do we need a brainstorming process? Are we looking for something to come to some kind of implementation plan? That's where you want to think about where you are in each agenda item. Sanity check. We have a 5-hour meeting, or 5 hours probably sounds like too much. We have a 3-hour meeting in a 2-hour bag. I call it the 5 pounds of potatoes in a 2-pound bag. And just pause after you've come up with that agenda and think about, okay, we got things in a manageable amount. Is there some work that needs to be done in advance? And then last of all, creating closure. So using that time at the end to do some summarizing of decisions or checking in on what needs to happen next and when the next meeting is. In some ways, I think it doesn't sound like rocket science, and it's not. At the same time, I've done enough training on this over the years to realize many times we may know good practices, but we need the refresher, or we get caught on time. Our lives are busy and we sort of get to the meeting and there we are. We haven't really had a chance to think about it in advance. So I encourage you to just take a little time to refresh maybe 1 or 2 things and find yourself in a better spot creating the kind of meetings you want to be at. You see on the screen there, and this is on your handout as well, a parking lot. And if you've ever heard this term, you might know it's not just about parking your car, it's also about if things come up during the meeting that either can't be addressed right then, at that point in the meeting, or maybe need to be addressed at a future meeting, writing those things down so that when you come to those, you can come to them toward the end of your meeting if you have a little more time, or maybe they get stacked into the next meeting agenda. So that's true whether it's County Extension Committee or County Board or you name it, things that you need to pay attention to using that parking lot wisely. So I'll move forward with our next item, and that is parliamentary procedure. And here I'm going to ask Tammy to pop up the poll, because I'm curious to know to what extent does your County Extension Committee use parliamentary procedure? You use it, number 1 means you never use it. Number 5 means all the time, everything gets voted on, and 2 or 3 is sort of that middle zone. 2 is a little more than not at all, but not much, and 3 is, yeah, we use it fairly frequently. So if you would, please, that poll pod, again, if it pop up on your screen directly, you can click on the arrow next to polling, it'll show. And Tammy, how are we doing there? Poll popping in?
Good. I'm going to go ahead and close it, which will give you about 20 seconds to respond right now.
Okay. All right. So if you haven't responded yet, click get in your tape. Gives us an idea. And again, this is an activity like you can start an agenda item with a question rather than a report. So another way to engage people in the meeting and use your leadership to create a shared sense of responsibility. So quite a few people on that free, using it some but not all the time, and some using it 7 of the 40 using it all the time, and a number of folks who either weren't able to answer, and some on that lower end, but nobody is not using it. All right. Well, I mentioned parliamentary procedure in part because I know that gets used in extension committees, but I also mention it because it's one of those, I call it a I actually couch it as a facilitation tool. It really came about historically during Greek and Roman times. It's about democratic governance. It's about getting away from just the dictator or the king or queen to, hey, we all have a say here, and how do we provide a system for inclusive and respectful meetings? That's really the main role of parliamentary procedure, is really a system or a set of rules and customs that is about inclusive and respectful meetings so that we protect the rights of the minority or the people who aren't necessarily the majority opinion by giving an opportunity to include those perspectives, even as we use voting to determine a majority rules. So I mention that because sometimes parliamentary procedure is, recently in the last couple of years, I've worked with a couple of boards where it's been new to learn parliamentary procedure. They didn't get it in 4-H or FFA or wherever they did, student government. And so I encourage people to have that working knowledge. Sounds like a number of you use it at some level. The Committees at Work guidebook that I'll mention later has a page or 2 at the most. It's meant to be very simplified because mostly I found that unless you're on a county board or serving at the state legislature or at an elected level, where that's the case, school boards as well, the use of it is really, it's small, and it's usually sufficient to just have a few tools for using that. So as you serve as the county board, or excuse me, extension committee chair or vice chair, that's something you could probably get a little coaching from Tammy or Marty or your regional director if you're less sure about that. And a little knowledge goes a long way. So I'll encourage that too. And really, I think the main thing around parliamentary procedure that I would leave you is that the rules are meant as a means to an end, not an end in itself. So I think when there's concerns about fair treatment of members or issues, using discussion, and that doesn't necessarily mean parliamentary procedure. If you think about meetings that have worked really well, it's about people's ability to contribute and a leader who allows for meaningful discussion, not just yes or no. So when we get to that any discussion piece, typically 3 times you ask it, because some of us jump in and talk and others are more reserved or need a little chance to think about things. And when people are sharing things, it can give a little time to digest. it's important to give that kind of space. And you wouldn't necessarily need parliamentary procedure, but if you find that your committee or any other group you're part of where there's some kind of concern there, you might want to do a review of that. I think the best times or the most key times for using parliamentary procedure is when you have a complex or a divisive issue. You can see how having that sort of structure will help people to feel like, oh, I know when I can speak. When you have large or more diverse groups, and if the stakes are significant, you probably used parliamentary procedure on a hiring. If you hired somebody in your county extension committee, you probably used it there. So that's an example. Ultimately, if a group's working effectively and treating each other with respect, you probably don't need to use parliamentary procedure very much. But again, if you have a vote that needs to be binding or documented, that's a place where we typically find it. So the last thing I'm going to check in at or mention is really about reflection and evaluation. I like to mention that evaluation has the word value in it for a reason, because we can learn things and we can sort of mine gold from evaluation. These 3 questions that are up on the screen are the 3 ones that I typically use when I'm working with a group over time. It's really easy to remember what's working well because we want to build that, we want to get more of that. What's challenging or what's been a frustration? And what specifically can we do to improve? And those are on your handout as well. I mention those because taking a few moments even at the end of the meeting to say, okay, what worked well tonight? And within a couple of minutes, you can have some feedback that's valuable to say, okay, you know, sometimes things don't go as we hope or we have a longer discussion. What might we specifically do to help improve meetings? And so then it's not all on your shoulders as the chair, but again, you're inviting that kind of conversation to help people to be a part and take their responsibility along with yours as a positional leader to get things done. I'll just quickly show you once again those 3 keys to those more effective committees: the engaged members, the strong leadership, and the good process. And then the last thing, I mentioned the Committees at Work guidebook. Right now, it turns out, if you wanted to get one of these, it would be a bit of a challenge because we've had such a sale, we've sold out. So we're getting permissions to print them again. So it's going to be, it might be, I'm not sure how long. It depends on how quickly we get permissions for some of the materials that we've included. But my hope is in the next month or so, and maybe it's fall, I hope not. But I also know many of the regional directors have those, and if you were curious about it, I'm sure you could get a loaner copy or check in. And if you'd like an in-person workshop, I am part of a 11-member team around the state. I've mentioned Beth Kellerstedt, my colleague in Rochester, but we've got folks across the state, basically. We're meant to serve the entire state. And so if you're curious to do a workshop like this or do a little brush up or have a half-hour program or something like that, we typically do them in 3-hour blocks. I know I've done things 3 hours for cities and for nonprofit groups. I've also done them in leadership cohorts. And always people say, those are things I can use right away. And so I hope that's for you today, that I've touched on something that as experienced as you might be, you feel like, hey, that's something I can try, whether it's a question for evaluation or something to open your committee. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Marty.
Move on to the focus of this next section on strengthening county extension committees. We will overview committee roles and responsibilities, shared meeting management expectations, and identify best practices for successful committees. The central focus is on Extension's mission, making that difference by connecting community needs and university resources to address those issues, and the Extension Committee has a critical role in making that happen. And so through providing local knowledge, knowing your community and its resources, and building those community connections, and connecting Extension staff to relevant community partners, and serving as a pulse on those community needs in doing so, providing helpful feedback to strengthen programs, and assisting staff in determining those local program priorities, and recommending local budgets and support and fund development efforts, all these being critical in addressing local needs and making that difference through university and community resources. And so with the mission, how does it stay strong? And a little background here is that Congress passed Smith-Lever in 1914 to federally create extension. And followed by 1923, the Minnesota State Statute forms extension committees. And in 2002 was the last revision of the Minnesota State Statute and its importance for the Extension Committee in remaining and staying strong. Minnesota County Extension Law has 3 components. And so with the County Extension Committee, the members help identify community issues and Extension's educational needs throughout communities, working with staff to deliver Extension programs, and recommending budget and funding. And so some components of each of these are, as committee chair, vice chair, and members, knowing your community and the resources, and connecting the staff to relevant community partners, and assisting staff in determining those local needs. And in providing program support and advocacy, it means becoming familiar with available extension programs and resources, often participating in extension program offerings, and representing and serving as an extension advocate in a positive and proactive manner within the county and community. As an extension committee, this quote is really fitting, because coming together is a beginning. So as a committee, whether you meet quarterly or 5 times a year, it's keeping together in making progress, and working together is success. It outlines teamwork. Moving on to this next section is on what can you expect from your regional director staff. And there are 3 primary areas as a chair, vice chair, as well as all the members can expect. But in pre-meeting preparation, the chair and vice chair work with the regional director in proposing topics for the meeting agenda and communicating with the committee membership on asking what their input is, for example. In developing the agenda, it is important to recognize that there may be items that just happen to come up during the meeting. And so working that together means some meeting management. And being available to review the agenda together is critical, and providing orientation to new Extension Committee members. Ongoing, providing relevant and timely information regarding the county and university partnership. And so that means having conversation about local community needs, as well as program efforts that are happening within the county from our local or regional staff. Next, we will move on to expectations for the chair and vice chair in the pre-meeting, meeting management, and ongoing efforts. And in developing the agenda, we want it to be an active process. And that means to be well informed about topics that are on the agenda, as Lisa and Tammy have already identified in some of the previous conversation. And in meeting management, those keys to effective meetings, in leading the meeting in a way that is appropriate and meaningful. Engaging members in the discussion and decision-making on the topics that are at hand. Ongoing, requiring that communication between the regional director and the chair and vice chair, so all are on the same page regarding happenings and needs. And advocating on behalf of the University of Minnesota Extension and the partnership. Advocacy can take many forms and shapes, but it's been positive about the role and the mission of Extension, and sharing that with others in the community as well as with our stakeholders. And now we will move to our best practices section with Tammy.
Thanks, Marty. So I'm going to move into specific example from an outgoing chair, or I should say more than one example, from an outgoing chair by the name of Suzanne Honebrink. And Suzanne served as the Extension Committee Vice Chair and Chair for Carver County and sat down with me and recorded several videos just sharing some best practices in leading a meeting and facilitating an Extension Committee meeting. The video is longer than what I'm actually going to be sharing with you. However, due to time, we're not going to share the whole video, and we're going to make sure that we email the link to the YouTube video for you to watch on your own time. So let me open up the multimedia player. And in order to watch the video, it is under the multimedia viewer, and you're going to want to click on the right-hand arrow, and it is playing right now. With that, I'm going to share that video link on YouTube so you can watch the full extent of it. But given the amount of time we have, I just wanted to give you a glimpse at some of the insight that Suzanne shared. And I think amongst the group today, we have even more wealth of information and ideas and experience in effectively running a meeting. So if you wouldn't mind, could you take a moment and use the chat pod and expand that and go ahead and share some ideas or notes of one or more of your best committee meeting management practices. So take some time now. This is the chance where you can share some of that good work that you're doing locally. And as you're doing that, I just wanted to highlight some of the things that I heard Suzanne saying, and if you feel comfortable sharing those things instead, some of the things you learned from Suzanne in the video, feel free to share that as well in the chat pod. But Suzanne provided several years of leadership as the chair and the vice chair to the Carver County Extension Committee meeting. And some of the things I heard from her was the importance of subcommittees and using subcommittees to take a large-scale item and allow a small group to gather more information, discuss it, and bring it back to the committee for a decision. And she suggested subcommittees for the performance review process and also for the budget. And I know sometimes subcommittees have been used for Farm Family of the Year selection or recruitment. And so subcommittees can be a good tool, given that our extension committees don't meet monthly, and there may be an opportunity for that subcommittee to connect in the months in between the scheduled extension committee meetings. One of the other things that Suzanne shared was the importance of the committee being represented throughout the county budget process. And if the county is supportive, that an extension committee member, whether that's the chair or vice chair or a member of the budget subcommittee, join the regional director in those meetings and those presentations. Suzanne also emphasized the importance of local leaders and state leaders in that advocacy role that the Extension Committee could play. And that this is a grassroots effort of you being able to tell your story or the story of others that have benefited from the work of Extension. Good, thank you, Katie. She shared that good agendas and encouraging all members to share ideas. And grants ensure clear goals and the purpose of the work, the timeline, and next steps. Very true. So making sure that people leave and know what the action items are. Suzanne also talked a little bit about Extension Committee presentations from the Extension staff. And I think this is an important thing to mention, that the Extension Committee can have a role in encouraging the staff to share their work in a different format than just a written report, that they could present in partnership with a program partner, a program participant. They could use video. They could also ask something of the committee. So, they present on something, maybe they would like the committee to help them in sharing about an upcoming event that they're doing. So could the committee share that with their networks to try to encourage participation. So the other thing that I think Suzanne mentioned is opening the meeting with a question so that everybody can be engaged from the beginning. Any other comments from those participants on the call? Okay.
Tammy?
Yes.
Lisa here. I wanted to ask, Katie said something about a good agenda, and I'd love to hear more from her about what a good agenda is for her. I know I outlined some things, but I'm curious if there's anything she would add. If she wanted to pop into the chat pod and just note any features of a good agenda that she thinks of, because I've actually learned some things from these workshops, and I love hearing people's ideas. And Grant, I'm right with you on clear goals and purpose when it comes to running a meeting. Having that purpose is like, why meet when you really need to, right?
Yeah. I don't see anything yet from Katie, but I see Diane mention the expectation that all committee members report on their part of the county and activities going on and the assignments that they had to report back to the committee on. That's a great point.
Yeah, expectation is so important. So important. Thank you, Diane.
Okay. So again, Extension engages Minnesotans, and you are an important part to that engagement. Over 1,000 Minnesotans serve on advisory boards such as the Extension Committee. So as a reminder, what we learned today are objectives that we set out to do, which we shared earlier, learning strategies, reinforcing the value, reviewing your roles and responsibilities, and sharing best practices and resources. And this does not end today. We hope that you continue this conversation with your extension committees, you share what you learned, but also that you have a great conversation with your regional director about how you might work together in creating a really engaged committee meeting. So the evaluation for this particular training is available now. As you exit out of the WebEx, a link, or actually the actual evaluation will pop up. You can complete it now, or you'll also get an email after the training for you to complete that. We really would love your feedback so that we know if we met our objectives, and also if we were to consider offering other opportunities, other opportunities, we know what you might be interested in. And without a doubt, I cannot let another minute pass without thanking you for your service to the people of Minnesota through Extension. So thank you again for your service to your County Extension Committee and to the larger organization of the University of Minnesota Extension. Thank you.